I looked at the small silver frame on my desk, a photo of us laughing under the neon lights of the Nashville skyline, and realized that for the last decade, I've been living in a house built of smoke and mirrors. Have you ever woken up, reached over to touch the person you'd die for, and suddenly felt a chill down your spine because you realized you don't actually know who they are? That's where I am right now. Before I tell you how I burned it all down, I need to know. Have you ever felt that gut feeling that something was wrong, but you ignored it because the truth was too terrifying to face? Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I need to know there's a world outside this nightmare. And if you've ever survived a betrayal that rearranged your DNA, hit that subscribe button, because this is for us. My name is Gage, and until 3 months ago, I thought I was the luckiest man in Tennessee. I married Maren when we were 24. She was the girl who could light up a room without trying a high school teacher, with a soft laugh and an obsession with classic literature. We had the house with the wraparound porch, the golden retriever, and a life that looked like a filtered Instagram ad. Our neighbors in our quiet cul-de-sac used to call us the gold standard of couples, but looking back, that perfection was the first red flag. Real life isn't that polished. Real people have edges, bad moods, and messy corners. Maren, however, was always exactly what I needed her to be. If I was stressed from a high-stakes project at the engineering firm, she was the calm harbor with a glass of bourbon and the right words. If I wanted to hike the Smokies, she was the first one in the truck with the gear packed. She was a chameleon, and I was too blinded by my own ego to see her skin changing colors right in front of me. The first crack in the mirage didn't happen with a loud bang. It was a Tuesday evening in October. The air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and damp leaves. Maren was in the kitchen humming a song I didn't recognize, something haunting and jazz-heavy, while she plated dinner. Her phone buzzed on the granite counter. Usually we were an open book couple. We knew each other's passcodes, shared a cloud, the whole bit. But when I reached out to hand it to her, she snatched it up with a speed that felt violent. It wasn't just the movement. It was the look in her eyes, a flash of cold, calculating panic that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual soft, teacherly smile. "Just a group chat from school, babe," she said, her voice like honeyed silk. "They never stop complaining about the new curriculum. It's exhausting." I nodded, swallowed a piece of steak that suddenly tasted like cardboard, and felt a tiny, sharp needle of doubt prick the center of my chest. That needle stayed there festering for weeks. I started noticing the glitches. She'd tell a story about a faculty meeting, but the details would shift 2 days later. She started working late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, claiming she was tutoring a student who was struggling with Gatsby. But her hair would smell like expensive cigars, not the scent of a high school classroom. One rainy afternoon while she was tutoring, I went to our library. Maren loved old novels, and our living room was lined with hundreds of them. I was looking for a specific copy of a poetry collection we'd read together on our honeymoon. I pulled a thick, leather-bound volume from the shelf, and it felt wrong. It was too light. When I opened the cover, the center of the pages had been neatly, surgically hollowed out. Tucked inside was a small, high-capacity external drive and a burner SIM card. My hands started to shake so hard I almost dropped the book. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was an architecture of deceit. This was a second life, or maybe several. I didn't confront her. My training as a structural engineer kicked in. You don't scream at a bridge when you find a crack. You map the entire failure before you decide how to tear it down. I waited until she went for her Saturday morning yoga retreat. Then I took that drive to my home office and locked the door. I spent 6 hours bypassing the encryption, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When the files finally opened, I didn't see one man. I saw a curated gallery of lives I wasn't invited to. There were 3 main folders meticulously organized by digital tags. The first folder was labeled The Anchor. I clicked it and felt the air leave the room. It was full of photos and saved voicemails between Maren and a man named Brooks. He was clearly in his late 50s, silver-haired, always pictured in front of a private jet or a penthouse view. In her messages to him, Maren wasn't the sweet Tennessee teacher I married. She was Mary, a struggling poetic soul who worked in a high-end art gallery. She told him about the void in her heart and how his masculine wisdom was the only thing keeping her from drifting away. She was playing the damsel, and he was clearly her benefactor. There were receipts for jewelry and wire transfers to a bank account I'd never seen. She had built a whole identity on being a sophisticated, vulnerable woman who needed a powerful man to protect her. I felt a wave of nausea, but I kept clicking. I had to know. The second folder was labeled The Rush. This was Colt. He was younger than me, covered in black and grey tattoos, usually pictured on a motorcycle or in the back of a smoky dive bar. With him, she wasn't Mary the poet or Maren the teacher. She was Wren. She wore leather jackets I'd never seen in our closet and used language that made my skin crawl. Her messages to Colt were aggressive, raw, and laced with a wildness I'd never witnessed in 10 years of marriage. She wasn't looking for a savior with him. She was looking for an escape from the boring, suffocating suburban prison she claimed I kept her in. She told him I was a roommate she was stuck with for financial reasons, a ghost she had to tolerate until she could break free. The third folder, The Mirror, was the most disturbing. This was Remy. He was an artist, thin, pale, with a camera always around his neck. To him, Maren was a patron of the arts, a woman who understood his unrecognized genius in a world of Philistines. She spent hours messaging him about his photography, feeding his ego to keep him tethered to her. She used her empathy as a weapon, playing the role of the only person who truly saw him. She wasn't after his money or his thrill. She was after the power of being someone's entire world. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my wedding ring. I realized Maren wasn't just a cheater. She was a predator of personalities. She was whoever the man in front of her needed her to be. Brooks wanted to be a hero. She became a victim. Colt wanted a thrill. She became a rebel. Remy wanted to be understood. She became a muse. And me. What was I? I was the foundation. I was the one who provided the health insurance, the 401k, the respectable last name and the social standing that allowed her to play these games in the shadows. I was the reliable, boring anchor that kept her from floating into the abyss while she explored her other fantasies. The notification vibration against my hip felt like a localized earthquake, a rhythmic buzzing that signaled another lie arriving in real time. I didn't flinch. I let her hold me, let her think her foundation was still solid and unsuspecting, while I stared at the hallway mirror and saw a man I didn't recognize, a man who was learning to breathe underwater. Every second she pressed her face against my shoulder was a second I spent recalibrating my soul. The woman I had loved for a decade was a masterpiece of fiction, and if I wanted to survive the sequel she was writing, I had to become the most convincing actor in the room. When she finally pulled away, she gave me that lingering, soft focus look the one she probably used to transition from Ren back to Maren. It was terrifyingly efficient. She went to the kitchen to pour me a glass of water, and I watched the fluid grace of her movements, wondering if her muscles even remembered how to be honest. I spent that night lying awake next to her, staring at the ceiling fan's shadow as it sliced through the moonlight. Beside me, she slept the deep, peaceful sleep of the sociopathically gifted. I, on the other hand, was descending into the rabbit hole. The following weeks weren't about confrontation, they were about reconnaissance. I didn't just want to know who she was seeing, I needed to understand the mechanics of her soul. I became a ghost in my own life. I installed keyloggers on the home network and used my engineering background to sync her hollowed-out book drive to a mirror server in my office. I began to spend my lunch hours and eventually my entire nights watching the live feed of her digital lives. It was like watching a horror movie where the monster wears your wife's face. I watched her interact with Brooks through their encrypted messaging app. To him, she was a delicate flower wilting in the harsh winds of the world. She'd send him voice notes in a whisper, her tone breathless and fragile. "The gallery was so loud today, Brooks," she'd murmur, referring to the job she didn't actually have. "I just want to hide in the silence of your strength." I watched him reply with grand promises of rescuing her, followed by notifications of 5-figure transfers to her escape fund bank account. It was a transaction of ego for currency. She gave him the illusion of being a savior, and he gave her the capital to maintain her independence from me. Then I'd switch windows and see her with Colt. The transformation was jarring enough to give me whiplash. The messages were short, jagged, and dripping with a dark, primal energy. She sent him photos of herself in outfits I'd never seen, black lace, heavy eyeliner, a look of bored defiance. "He's watching the game again," she wrote about me, her voice dripping with a simulated contempt. "The walls in this house are closing in, Colt. I need to feel the wind. I need to feel something real." With him, she wasn't the victim. She was the huntress. She used him to burn off the good girl energy she had to maintain for the school board and for our neighbors. He was her exhaust pipe, the place where she vented the parts of herself she deemed too dirty for our suburban life. But Remy, the photographer, was perhaps the most sinister. With him, she wasn't Mary or Wren. She was a philosopher queen. She sent him long, rambling essays about the transience of light and the loneliness of the artistic spirit. She made him feel like he was the only man on earth with an intellect worth her time. She'd offer to model for his private collections I knew would eventually lead to a bedroom. She wasn't just taking their bodies or their money. She was harvesting their admiration. She was a narcissist who required multiple mirrors to feel alive, because if she only looked at one, she might see the empty space where a heart should be. The psychological toll on me was immense. Have you ever had to sit across the dinner table from a person and discuss the weather, while you have a video of them in your pocket, doing things that would make a sailor blush? I started to lose weight. My skin turned a sickly shade of grey. My co-workers at the firm asked if I was ill, and I just told them it was stress from the new project. In a way it was. The project was the total deconstruction of Maren. I began to track her physical movements. One Thursday, instead of the tutoring session, I followed her. I stayed 3 cars back, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack a bone. She didn't go to the high school. She drove to a luxury apartment complex downtown, the one Brooks paid for. I watched her enter the lobby as Maren, wearing her sensible teacher flats and carrying a tote bag full of graded papers. And then, 45 minutes later, I saw a woman exit the elevator who looked like a high-fashion ghost. She had changed into a silk slip dress, her hair pinned up, looking like $1 million of cold, hard, calculated beauty. She climbed into a waiting black car that I knew was headed to a gallery opening with Brooks. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for hours, the engine off, the silence of the cabin, feeling like a tomb. I realized then that I wasn't just a husband who was being cheated on. I was a prop in her play. I was the normalcy she returned to so she wouldn't lose her mind in the chaos of her own lies. I was her anchor, not because she loved me, but because I kept her tethered to a reality she could use as a shield. If anyone ever questioned her virtue, they'd look at me, the stable engineer, and our perfect house, and they'd dismiss the rumors. I was her alibi. The anger didn't come all at once. It was a slow burn chemical reaction. It started as a cold, crystalline spite and turned into a focused, lethal intent. I realized that if I confronted her now, she would win. She was a master of gaslighting. She'd turn it on me, make me out to be the unstable, spying husband, and she'd use her 3 saviors to disappear. She'd take the escape fund Brooks built, use Colt for protection and Remy to document her rebirth. No, I couldn't just catch her. I had to dismantle the entire theatre. I started to play the game back. I began to drop hints that I was investing our joint savings into a new venture, when in reality I was moving every cent into an offshore account she couldn't touch. I started to act more vulnerable to see if she'd bite. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Maren," I told her one night over a glass of wine. "You're the only thing that's real in this world." I watched her eyes. There was a flicker, not of guilt, but of triumph. She loved the power she had over my perceived weakness. It fed her. As the weeks bled into a second month, the tension in my chest became a permanent fixture. I found myself standing in the garage at 3 a.m., looking at my tools, my mind racing with 1,000 different ways to end this. But I didn't want a crime of passion. I wanted a masterpiece of justice. I wanted her to feel the exact moment when the foundation was pulled out from under her, leaving her to fall into the void she had created. The turning point happened when I found a hidden file on the drive labeled Final Exit. It was a digital folder containing forged documents, a police report for domestic abuse she hadn't filed yet, photos of bruises that were clearly stage makeup, and a pre-written letter to her friends and family explaining why she had to flee for her life. She wasn't just cheating. She was preparing to destroy me legally and socially so she could walk away with a clean slate and a victim's narrative. She was planning to kill Gage, the husband, and replace him with Gage, the monster. The grip I had on her hand as we climbed those stairs felt less like a husband's touch and more like a shackle, though she was far too intoxicated by her own perceived brilliance to notice. Every step we took upward into the sanctuary of our bedroom felt like a descent into a deeper, darker theatre of war. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin, a warmth that once meant safety, but now felt like the surface temperature of a dying star, bright, blinding, and utterly hollow at the core. I watched the back of her head, the way her hair swayed with a practiced elegance, and I realized that I wasn't just walking into a room, I was walking into the final phase of the reconstruction. Sleep didn't come that night, nor did I want it to. I lay there listening to Maren's breath, long, rhythmic, and terrifyingly untroubled. It's a special kind of torture to share a pillow with someone who is actively plotting your social and legal execution. My mind, sharpened by years of structural analysis, began to pivot. If Maren was the architect of this chaos, I was about to become the demolition expert who knew exactly where the load-bearing lies were hidden. I wasn't just going to catch her. I was going to strip her of the very ability to reinvent herself. I needed to ensure that when the dust settled, there wouldn't be enough left of her personas to build a single mask. The next morning, the cold reconstruction began in earnest. I waited for her to leave for school or wherever Mary or Wren was scheduled to appear, and I went to work. I didn't go to the firm. I called in sick, my voice a practiced rasp of feigned exhaustion. As soon as her car cleared the driveway, I transformed our second bedroom into a command center. I wasn't just looking at her files anymore, I was building a web. I started by tracing the money. Brooks, the silver-haired anchor, wasn't just sending her safety net cash. He was paying for a lifestyle that required a paper trail. I found digital receipts for a storage unit downtown, Unit 402. By noon, I was standing in front of that corrugated metal door. The air in the facility smelled of industrial cleaner and forgotten things. When the lock clicked open, I found the physical manifestation of her madness. It wasn't a storage unit. It was a dressing room for a ghost. There were racks of clothes that Maren would never wear, expensive silks for Brooks, shredded denim and leather for Colt, and ethereal thrift store chic for Remy. There were wigs, different sets of makeup, and most importantly, folders of physical evidence. Maren was meticulous. She kept journals not for emotional release, but for continuity. She had written down the likes, dislikes, and tragic backstories she had fed to each man, so she wouldn't trip over her own tongue. I sat on a cold plastic crate in the middle of that unit, reading her handwriting. To Brooks, she was the daughter of an alcoholic poet who died in a garret. To Colt, she was a former foster kid who had survived the streets of East St. Louis. To me, I looked for my section. I was the comfortable mistake. I was the man she married because she was tired of running, the man she intended to use as a sacrificial lamb when she was ready to run again. The sheer coldness of her prose was a physical blow. She didn't hate me. She just didn't see me as human. I was a utility like a water heater or a lawnmower. That afternoon, I didn't just take photos. I began the harvest. I took the journals. I took the burner SIM cards she had taped to the back of a mirror. I took the forged documents she had prepared for her final exit, the ones that painted me as a monster. But I didn't just take them. I replaced them. I spent hours with a high-end scanner and a bottle of ink subtly altering the journals. I changed dates. I changed small details in the domestic abuse logs she'd forged, making them contradict her own digital IGPS history. If she tried to use them, the inconsistencies would make her look like the architect of a hoax. I was engineering her downfall into her own blueprints. The high-stakes tension of the next few days was a tightrope walk over an abyss. Every time I looked at her, I felt the urge to reach out and snap the thread of her lies, but I waited. I watched her near misses with a detached fascination. One evening, she left her Brooks phone on the charger in the kitchen while she went to shower. It buzzed a text from Brooks. "The villa in Tuscany is booked for June Mary. Our new life begins." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I could have ended it then. I could have sent a photo of my face, but that would be too quick. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in the way I had felt them for months. The tipping point arrived on a Friday. I was at the office when I received a notification from the hidden software I'd installed on her laptop. She was accessing a bank account I hadn't seen before, a joint account, but not with me. It was with a shell company. She was moving a massive sum of money, our money, the equity from our home that she'd managed to siphon off through a series of home improvement loans I'd blindly signed for. She was preparing to vanish within the next 48 hours. She was going to leave me with a mountain of debt, a ruined reputation, and a house that was no longer mine. The betrayal hit its absolute peak. It wasn't just about the other men anymore. It was about the total erasure of my existence. She didn't just want a new life. She wanted to bury me in the ruins of the old one. I sat in my office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and for the first time I didn't feel pain. I felt a profound, crystalline clarity. The Gage who loved her was dead. The Gage who wanted to fix things was gone. All that was left was the man who understood how to make a structure fail. I began my own final exit. I contacted a private investigator. I'd been secretly working with a man named Nash who specialized in difficult divorces. We didn't just have evidence. We had a symphony of destruction. I had the logs of her mocking Brooks's age to Colt. I had the recordings of her laughing at Colt's childish rebellion to Remy. I had the financial records showing she'd been stealing from all of them. I wasn't just going to lose her. I was going to ensure she lost every single one of her lives simultaneously. That evening, when I came home, she had cooked a lavish dinner. Salmon asparagus, a bottle of expensive Cabernet. She was the perfect wife at 100% capacity. She talked about our future, about taking a sabbatical to travel together. She was setting the stage for her disappearance, making sure the last memory I had of her was one of bliss, so that my sudden turn to violence in her forged police reports would seem all the more shocking. "You're very quiet tonight, Gage," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her skin felt like ice despite the warmth of the room. "Is the project at the firm still bothering you?" "It's almost finished, Maren," I said, and my voice was as steady as a heartbeat. "The demolition phase starts tomorrow. It's the most delicate part. If you don't do it right, the whole thing can collapse on the people you're trying to protect. I'm sure you'll handle it perfectly." She smiled, her eyes as vacant as a doll's. "You always do." I watched her take a sip of wine, the red liquid staining her lips like blood. I thought about the journals in my trunk, the altered evidence in her storage unit, and the 3 men who are currently receiving anonymous packages containing very specific, very devastating information about their dream woman. I thought about the fact that her safety net was currently being unravelled by a team of lawyers I'd put on retainer with her own stolen cash. We spent the rest of the evening in a state of hyper-real tension. We watched a movie, her head resting on my shoulder, while I mentally checked off the boxes of her destruction. Every time she shifted, every time she sighed, I felt the clock ticking. She was a woman on the edge of a cliff, and she thought she was a bird about to take flight. As the movie ended, and the credits rolled in silence, the house felt unnaturally still. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows of our perfect suburban home. Maren stood up, stretching her arms above her head, a predator in a state of total relaxation. "I think I'll head up first," she murmured, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "Don't stay up too late, Gage. You need your rest for the big day tomorrow." I watched her walk toward the stairs, the light from the hallway casting a long, distorted shadow behind her. I didn't say a word. I sat in the darkness, the only light coming from the flickering embers in the fireplace. I waited until I heard the faint click of the bedroom door closing. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I sent a single text to Nash. "The fuses are lit. Tomorrow morning we drop the building." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, empty street. I felt a strange sense of mourning, not for her, but for the man I used to be, the man who believed in the filtered Instagram life we'd built. That man was gone, buried under the weight of 1,000 lies. I wasn't a husband anymore, I was a survivor, and as I turned off the final lamp in the living room, plunging the house into a cold, absolute darkness, I felt a grim, silent satisfaction. The reconstruction was over. The stage was set. Tomorrow the world would finally see the real. Maren and I would be the one holding the lights. I walked toward the kitchen, my footsteps silent on the hardwood, and picked up the heavy, leather-bound book of poetry I'd left on the counter, feeling the empty space inside, where her secrets used to live. The hollow weight of that gutted poetry book in my hands felt like the only honest thing left in this house. I stood in the kitchen, the moonlight cutting across the marble island like a butcher's blade, and I realized that the man who used to live here, the man who loved Maren, didn't exist anymore. He had been replaced by a cold, calculating stranger who was about to finish what she started. This is the moment where the masks fall, the money disappears, and the life you thought you knew turns into a crime scene. But before we get to the final blow, I have to ask you, if you found out your entire life was a lie, would you walk away quietly, or would you make sure they felt every ounce of the pain they caused you? Tell me in the comments, do you think the person who was betrayed has the right to be a monster just to get justice? I'm reading every single one of your responses, so let's talk. The morning of the promotion party arrived with a deceptive blue sky clarity. To the outside world, this was a celebration of my 10 years at the firm. To Maren, it was her final exit launchpad, the night she planned to slip away into the arms of Brooks while I was left holding a forged police report and a ruined reputation. She spent the afternoon getting ready, humming that same haunting jazz tune, her eyes bright with the thrill of the upcoming kill. She wore a deep emerald dress, a color that signaled growth and life, but on her it looked like the skin of a snake. "You look stunning, Gage," she said, straightening my tie in the mirror. Her touch was light, almost a blessing, a final "I love you" before she pulled the trigger. "It's a big night, Maren," I replied, meeting her gaze in the glass. "One we'll both remember for the rest of our lives." We arrived at the upscale Nashville venue, a rooftop space overlooking the city lights. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and champagne. All her worlds were converging, though she didn't know it yet. I had personally seen to the guest list. I had invited Brooks, telling him it was an exclusive networking event where he could meet a young, talented artist he'd been following. I had invited Colt, telling him there was a high-end bike auction preview happening in the private lounge, and Remy, I told him I wanted to commission a series of photos of the most beautiful woman in the world, and that tonight was the night to capture her essence. The tantalizing revenge didn't start with a shout. It started with a gift. In the middle of the party, after the speeches and the toasts, I asked for everyone's attention. Maren stood beside me, her hand tucked into my arm, her perfect wife smile radiating warmth. "I want to present a special gift to my wife," I said, into the microphone, the room falling silent. "A record of the woman she truly is." I handed her a beautifully wrapped heavy leather album. To the guests, it looked like a commemorative book of our decade together, but as she opened it, the color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might collapse. The first page wasn't a wedding photo. It was a high-resolution shot of Mary entering Brooks's penthouse. The second page was Wren at a dive bar with Colt. The third was the Muse in Remy's studio. "I think some of our guests would like to see this," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence. At that moment, the three men, Brooks, Colt, and Remy, who had been scattered in different corners of the room, began to move toward the center. I had sent each of them a digital preview of the album 10 minutes before the speech. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Brooks saw the struggling poet he had been bankrolling laughing at his age in a text to Colt. Colt saw the rebel he thought was his soulmate calling him a useful distraction to Remy. And Remy saw the woman he worshipped as a muse describing his art as pretentious garbage to me. The explosion wasn't loud, it was the sound of a woman's entire social and financial architecture crumbling in real time. Brooks was the first to speak. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. The escape fund account is frozen, Mary, or whatever your name is. I've already contacted the authorities about the wire fraud. Colt didn't say a word. He just looked at her with a disgust so pure it made her flinch. He walked away, taking with him the protection and the thrill she thought she controlled. And Remy. He simply raised his camera, took one final photo of her, now pale, shaking, and stripped of all her masks, and whispered, "The transience of light, and the absolute void of the soul." Maren turned to me, her eyes darting like a trapped animal's. "Gauge, please. I can explain. This is a misunderstanding. The only thing you need to explain, Maren, is why you thought I was as blind as you are hollow," I said, stepping back from her. "The house is already on the market. The accounts are drained. The domestic abuse logs you forged, I've already handed the originals along with your GPS records to the district attorney. You aren't a victim, Maren. You're a ghost." The fallout was total. In the weeks that followed, the gold standard couple of the Nashville suburbs became the lead story in every local scandal rag. She lost her job at the school. She lost the safety nets provided by her lovers. She lost the home that was never really hers. I watched from a distance as she was forced into a cheap one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, a place where no one knew Mary, Wren, or the Muse. The resolution brought a cold, hard-won peace. I moved to a small cabin in the woods far away from the filtered lives and the manicured lawns. I realized that you cannot fix a person who thrives on breaking you. My foundation wasn't the house or the marriage, it was the strength I found in the ruins. I am a survivor of a masterpiece of lies, and for the first time in my life I can breathe clean air. But now I want to hear from you. Some people say I was too cold, that my revenge was as monstrous as her betrayal. Others say she earned every second of that public shaming. What do you think? Did I go too far, or did I simply give her the only thing she truly deserved, the truth? Drop a comment below, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button. Because in this life, the truth doesn't just find the light, it burns everything that isn't real. I stood on the porch of my new home, the silence of the Tennessee woods wrapped around me like a blanket. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old wedding ring, feeling its weight one last time before I tossed it into the deep, dark water of the lake below. I didn't look back as it disappeared with a soft, final splash. I simply turned toward the door, walked inside, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.